The little boy standing by my restaurant door was so quiet I almost missed him. That was what stayed with me later. Not the rain. Not the yelling. Not even the way losing my job felt like someone had pulled the floorboards out from under my feet. It was the boy. Small. Still. Trying very hard not to cry in a place built for adults who liked their steaks dry-aged and their cocktails expensive. It was a Thursday in October, the kind of Chicago night that made the windows sweat and the sidewalks shine black under the streetlights. I was halfway through the dinner rush at Maple and Ashford, balancing 2 plates of short rib and a side of asparagus on my left arm, when I saw him through the glass. He could not have been older than 7. Blonde hair damp at the edges. Navy puffer jacket zipped all the way up. One sneaker untied. He was standing under the awning near the host stand window, clutching one strap of a little backpack like it was the only thing in the world that still belonged to him. At first I thought he was waiting for his mother to finish parking the car. That happened all the time. Wealthy families treated downtown like an inconvenience and children like accessories that needed managing. But when I came back past the front with an empty tray 3 minutes later, he was still there. Same spot. Same expression. Not bored. Not fussy. Just trying to look brave in the particular way children do when they are afraid and do not want anyone to know it. I set the tray down behind the service station and walked to the front before my manager could ask why table 12 had not gotten their extra bread yet. When I opened the door, the wind pushed cold rain across my ankles. "Hey there," I said, crouching so I was closer to his eye level. "You okay?" He looked up at me with wide gray-blue eyes that were much too steady for a child his age. "I think I got lost," he said. Not sobbing. Not dramatic. Just honest. "My dad told me not to talk to strangers, but I do not know what else to do." Something in my chest tightened. "That is a pretty reasonable exception," I told him. "Do you know your dad's phone number?" He shook his head. "I know his first name." "All right." I gave him what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "That is not nothing." "What is it?" "Adrian." He said it like I was supposed to know who Adrian was. I did not. I asked if he remembered his last name. He bit the inside of his cheek and looked down at his sneaker. "Sterling," he said after a second. "But my dad says I am not supposed to tell people that if I do not know them." "Your dad sounds smart," I said. "I am Claire." He considered that. "I am Noah." Behind me, I could hear the restaurant moving at full speed. Glassware clinking. The hostess apologizing to a waiting couple. Diane Mercer, our assistant general manager, telling someone in the kitchen that if one more salmon came out overcooked she would start naming names. I should have gone back to work. I knew that. I also knew I could not leave a 7-year-old standing in the cold because table 16 wanted another round of martinis. "Noah," I said gently, "would you like to come inside while we figure this out?" He glanced over his shoulder at the rain-dark sidewalk, then back at me. "Will I get you in trouble?" It was such an adult question that I nearly laughed. "Probably," I said. "But I think I can live with that." That got the smallest smile out of him. I brought him to the last booth near the service hallway, far enough from the dining room to keep him out of the traffic but close enough that I could still see him between tables. I grabbed him a glass of water, a basket of fries, and a warm dinner roll I probably was not supposed to give away without ringing it in. He thanked me every single time I set something down, like he had been raised by people who believed manners mattered even when the world had gone sideways. "Do you remember where you saw your dad last?" I asked while knotting his loose shoelace because it was bothering me. "Outside the hotel," he said. "There was a dog. A big white one. I followed it because it had a blue bow on its neck." "Of course you did." "I know," he said, looking ashamed. "That was not smart." "No," I said softly. "It was 7. He stared at the fries but did not eat one. His fingers kept worrying the zipper of his jacket. I noticed then that the watch on his wrist was not the plastic kind kids wore for school. It was a sleek little GPS watch, the kind that probably cost more than my electric bill. His backpack looked new too. Monogrammed. Navy leather trim. There was a silver water bottle tucked into the side pocket with the word Sterling engraved across it in clean block letters. Not written with a marker. Engraved. I had worked around wealthy people long enough to recognize the quiet kind of money. The kind that did not need logos because it assumed the world already knew. I am going to make a couple calls, okay? I told him. You stay right here. If anyone asks, you are with me. He nodded solemnly, as if we had just signed a legal agreement. I had barely taken 2 steps toward the host stand when Diane appeared beside me in heels sharp enough to wound somebody. She looked past me, saw the little boy in the booth, and her whole face changed. Not concern. Not confusion. Annoyance. What is that? She asked. That, I said, is a lost child. Diane folded her arms. And why is there a lost child in my dining room? I looked at Noah, then back at her. Because it is 38 degrees outside and raining. Her mouth thinned. Claire, this is not a daycare. Get him out of sight before customers start complaining. I glanced at the booth where Noah sat with his hands folded in his lap, trying to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Then I looked back at Diane. He is not a problem, I said. He is a kid. Diane's expression hardened in that way I had learned to fear. The way people look when they have already decided kindness is bad for business. I have learned that some people can look at a frightened child and still see nothing but inconvenience. Diane was one of them. She did not lower her voice when she spoke either, which meant Noah heard every word. I do not care if he is 7 or 17, she said, glancing toward the booth like he was a spilled drink someone had forgotten to wipe up. If a parent comes in here screaming about liability, I am not defending this decision to corporate because you felt maternal during dinner service. I kept my own voice even. Years in restaurants teach you how to do that. I am not asking you to defend anything. I am asking you to let a cold kid sit inside for 10 minutes while I figure out where his father is. Diane gave me the same look she reserved for customers who sent back salmon because it tasted too much like salmon. 10 minutes, she said. Then he is gone. And if table 14 complains about slow service again, you can explain to them why their check is being conked out of your tip pool. She walked off before I could answer. I stood there for half a second, counting to 3 the way my mother taught me before she moved into assisted living and started forgetting what year it was. Then I pulled my phone from my apron pocket and called the city's non-emergency line. I gave them the restaurant address, explained that I had a child who appeared safe but separated from his parent, and asked what the recommended next step was if no one came to claim him soon. The dispatcher was calm, which helped. She told me to keep him indoors, stay with him if possible, and call back immediately if he became distressed or if I got any identifying information. While I was on the phone, Tessa slipped beside me with a tray of old fashions balanced on one palm and murmured, "Do you want me to check outside?" Tessa Moore was 28, fast on her feet, and had the kind of eyeliner that stayed perfect through a 12-hour shift, which made me trust her more than was probably reasonable. "Please," I whispered. "Look around the hotel entrance too. He says he got separated near there." She nodded and disappeared through the front doors into the rain before I could thank her. When I went back to Noah, he was sitting exactly where I had left him, hands folded in his lap, the fries untouched. "You do not like fries?" I asked, sliding into the booth across from him for all of 20 seconds before my next table needed ranch dressing and extra napkins. He gave me a small, embarrassed shrug. "I do. I just do not feel hungry." "That is fair." I pushed the basket a little closer anyway. "Do you know your dad's last name?" "Sterling," he said again, then glanced around and lowered his voice. "But if somebody asks, I am not supposed to say it loud." "Why not?" Because people act weird. I smiled despite myself. That is one way to put it. He looked down at the silver water bottle tucked beside him. My dad says if I get lost, I should find a police officer or a mom. You were the closest thing to a mom. I do not know why that landed where it did, but it did. Maybe because my son Evan had been 15 when he decided living mostly with his father in Naperville would be easier than sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with me and my bills and my exhaustion. Maybe because nobody had called me somebody's mom in a while. Well, I said, clearing my throat, your dad gave excellent instructions. Noah finally took one fry and bit into it like he was doing me a favor. Then, because children are strange and abrupt creatures, he said, do you have kids? 1. Boy or girl? Boy. How old? 16. Noah nodded as if this was useful intelligence. Do you know where he is? At home, hopefully doing homework instead of gaming. That earned me the faintest smile. I was about to ask another question when Table 9 started waving their empty bread plate in the air like a distress flare. I got up, promised Noah I would be right back, and went to do what women in my tax bracket always do when life gets messy. I kept moving. Bread to Table 9. Refill at Table 11. Ranch to Table 7. Smile at the man in the quarter-zip who thought eye contact was an invitation to complain about the draft by the window. All the while I kept checking the booth near the service hall. Noah sat quietly, feet not reaching the floor, looking at the front door every time it opened. Tessa came back in soaked through at the shoulders and shook her head. No frantic parents outside, she said. But the doorman at the Langford said security has been searching the block for a little blonde kid in a navy coat. My stomach dropped and settled all at once. Did he say who they were with? Only that there were black SUVs and one man losing his mind in a cashmere coat. I looked toward Noah. He was twisting the cuff of his jacket now, finally starting to crack around the edges. Okay, I said. Then they are close. I was filling waters at the server station when the first complaint came. A woman in pearls at Table 6 leaned toward Diane and said something while gesturing openly toward Noah's booth. Diane's face tightened. She marched over to me before I could set the pitcher down. That child needs to disappear, she hissed. Now. He is waiting for his father. He is making guests uncomfortable. He is sitting quietly and eating fries. Claire. Her voice dropped lower, colder. You are not paid to rescue stray children. You are paid to serve the room. If you cannot tell the difference, I can fix the schedule for you. There it was. The threat tucked inside the warning. My Friday and Saturday shifts were the only reason I could keep up with Mom's medication copays. Diane knew that. She also knew I knew it. For one ugly second I thought about giving in. About walking back to Noah and telling him he had to wait in the hotel lobby or by the host stand or anywhere else that did not make rich diners glance over their wine glasses and remember the world contained problems. Then I looked at him. He had both hands wrapped around the water glass I had brought him, shoulders drawn tight, trying with everything in his small body to be easy to ignore. I turned back to Diane. Then fix the schedule, I said quietly. I am not putting him back out in the rain. Her eyes narrowed in a way that told me I had just made the kind of decision that follows you home. She started to say something else, but before she could, the front doors flew open hard enough to rattle the glass. Cold air rushed through the dining room. Every head near the entrance turned. And Noah, who had been so careful not to cry, was already halfway out of the booth, staring at the man who had just stepped inside like the world had finally remembered where to find him. The man who came through the front door did not look like the kind of person who lost things. He looked like the kind of person other people lost sleep trying not to disappoint. Tall. Dark overcoat soaked at the shoulders. Hair damp from the rain, pushed back with one impatient hand. There were two security men behind him and a hotel concierge in a navy trench coat trying to keep up, but the man in front was the only one Noah saw. "Dad!" Noah's voice cracked on the word, and that was the moment the room changed. He launched himself out of the booth so fast the water glass tipped and rolled, and the man crossed half the dining room in 3 strides before dropping to one knee and catching him against his chest. He held him there with both arms like he was trying to make up for every second they had been apart. "Noah," he said into the top of the boy's damp blonde hair, and for the first time since I had met him, Noah looked exactly 7. Small. Shaky. Relieved enough to be angry. "You left me," he said, his voice muffled against the man's coat. "I know." The man pulled back just enough to look at him. His face had the kind of composure money buys and crisis destroys. "I know, buddy. I am so sorry. I turned around for 30 seconds and you were gone." Noah swiped at his eyes with the heel of his hand. "I followed a dog." "Of course you did." It was almost exactly what I had said earlier, only his version came wrapped in the kind of exhausted love that makes strangers look away to give a family its dignity. He checked Noah over quickly, not theatrically, just the fast hands of a parent trying to make sure nothing worse had happened than fear. Then he stood, keeping one hand on Noah's shoulder, and looked around the restaurant until his gaze landed on me. There are people you recognize from television even if you have spent your life avoiding business news. He was one of them. Adrian Sterling. Founder of Sterling Freight Systems, Sterling Hotels, and half the glass buildings I passed on the way to work without ever imagining I would step inside one. I had seen his face in airport magazines, local business journals, and once on a billboard near O'Hare under the words Leadership Summit. In person he looked less polished and more dangerous, not because he was cruel but because he seemed like a man accustomed to moving entire rooms with a decision. Right then, though, he just looked like a father who had nearly lost his mind. He crossed to me with Noah still tucked close to his side. "You are Claire," he said. Not a question. Noah must have told him. His voice was low and controlled, but the adrenaline was still all over it. "Yes. I am Adrian Sterling." I figured. He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, then ran a hand over his face. "My son tells me you brought him inside, kept him calm, and called for help before anyone even found us." "He did most of the calm part himself," I said. "I just gave him fries." Noah looked up at his father. "And water." "And she fixed my shoe." Adrian's expression changed on that. Not bigger. Just softer around the edges, like gratitude had finally found a place to land now that fear was loosening its grip. "Thank you," he said, and there was nothing casual about it. "I do not have a phrase polished enough for how grateful I am that you did not leave him out there. I was not going to leave a child in the rain. Apparently that makes one of us with common sense tonight." He glanced back toward the hotel concierge, who looked ready to resign on the spot, then turned to Noah. "Did you thank Claire properly?" Noah straightened a little. "Yes, sir. I said thank you for the water and the fries and the bread." "Good." Adrian reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a slim black card case, and handed me one thick cream business card embossed with silver lettering. Not flashy. Just expensive in the quiet way everything around him seemed to be. "My office will call you tomorrow," he said. "I would like the chance to thank you properly, and I also want to make sure your manager knows exactly what you did for my son tonight." If he had stopped there, things might have gone very differently. But Diane, who had apparently smelled money the way sharks smell blood, appeared at Adrian's elbow with the kind of smile she only used on donors and local politicians. "Mr. Sterling," she said warmly, as if she had personally orchestrated the reunion. "I am Diane Mercer, Assistant General Manager here. At Maple and Ashford. We are just so relieved Noah is safe. Claire alerted us immediately, and we all did everything possible to make sure he was comfortable while we coordinated." It was such a smooth lie I almost admired it. Adrian looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "I see." Diane touched Noah's shoulder lightly, and I watched his body go still in the way children do when a stranger touches them and they are too well-mannered to pull away. He was in excellent hands, she went on. At Maple and Ashford, we pride ourselves on taking care of family. I nearly choked on the phrase. This from the woman who had threatened my weekend shifts over a 7-year-old with wet shoes and an untied lace. Adrian's expression did not change, which somehow made him harder to read. I am glad to hear that, he said. Because from what my son tells me, Claire is the reason he felt safe. Diane's smile held, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Of course. Claire is one of our staff. One of our staff. As if I were a fork she had loaned out. Adrian turned back to me. I do not want to keep Noah here any longer than necessary. But I meant what I said. Someone from my office will contact you in the morning. That is really not necessary, I said automatically. I was still in waitress mode, the one where you refuse expensive gestures before they can become obligations. You do not owe me anything. I disagree, he said simply. Noah tugged at his father's sleeve. Can Claire come tell you about the dog? Adrian looked at me, and for a second I saw the version of him that probably existed only in private. Tired. Fond. Slightly helpless in the face of a child who had decided the world still owed him one last answer. Do you have 30 seconds? He asked. I nodded, and we stepped a little away from the dining room traffic while Noah explained, with grave seriousness, that the dog had been enormous and white and wearing a blue bow tie, which was why he thought it must belong to someone responsible. Adrian listened like the details mattered. Maybe they did. Maybe when your child disappears for 45 minutes, every detail matters forever. When he finished, Adrian squeezed Noah's shoulder and looked at me one last time. Thank you, Claire. Then, more quietly, you did a very good thing tonight. I wish I could say those words felt like a reward. Mostly they felt dangerous. Because when Adrian and Noah finally left, taking the rain and the security detail and the concierge with them, the room exhaled all at once. Conversations restarted. Glasses clinked. The spell broke. And Diane turned toward me with a smile so thin it looked painful, the cream card still in my hand, and I knew before she opened her mouth that being thanked by the right man was about to cost me more than helping his son ever had. Diane did not say anything to me on the floor. That was worse. If she had hissed at me in the service station or snapped about table times in front of the host stand, I would have known what to do with it. Anger I understood. Anger had edges. It could be survived. But silence from Diane Mercer usually meant she was saving the damage for someplace private, where no one could witness the math she liked to do with other people's livelihoods. The rest of the shift passed in that strange, stretched-out way bad nights do. My section kept filling. The woman at table 6 wanted a manager because her C base was lukewarm in spirit. A couple in the corner booth argued in matching cashmere until the man paid the check in silence and left his wedding ring sitting beside the signed receipt like a threat. Tessa kept giving me quick looks from across the dining room, the kind that asked "Are you okay?" without forcing me to answer. And every so often I would feel the business card Adrian Sterling had handed me pressing against the inside pocket of my apron, as if it were reminding me that the evening had split into a before and an after without asking my permission. By the time the last dessert went out and the floor began to empty, my feet felt like broken glass in cheap black flats. I was rolling silverware near the service station when Diego from Dish came around the corner with a bust tub and muttered, "Mercer wants you in the office before you clock out." There it was. I tucked the last napkin around a fork, smoothed it flat, and stood up. The office at Maple and Ashford was not really an office. It was a narrow room off the back hallway with a metal desk, a filing cabinet that never fully closed, and a framed print about hospitality excellence that hung crooked no matter how often someone fixed it. Diane was already inside, sitting behind the desk with my file open in front of her like she was preparing to discuss a mortgage instead of my life. She did not ask me to sit. "Close the door," she said. I did. Then I stood there with my hands still damp from polishing glasses and waited for her to explain why helping a lost child had somehow become an administrative problem. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said at last. I blinked. "I embarrassed you. Do not repeat me in that tone." "I am sorry," I said, though I was not. "I just want to make sure I understand what crime I committed. Was it the fries or the shoelace?" Her jaw tightened. "This is exactly the issue, Claire. You think rules are optional when you feel emotionally justified. You pulled focus from your section during peak service. You seated a non-paying minor in the dining room. You involved emergency services." "Non-emergency services," I corrected automatically. "And he was not seated as a customer. He was lost. You called the police." "I called the city line because there was a 7-year-old child alone in the rain who could not reach his father. And in the process, you created a spectacle." That word landed harder than I expected. Spectacle. As if Noah had been a performance instead of a scared little boy with wet hair and a twisted shoelace. "No," I said carefully. "His father arriving with hotel security created a spectacle. I just kept him inside until that happened." Diane leaned back in her chair and studied me the way people study stains they have decided are permanent. "Do you know what Maple and Ashford sells, Claire?" she asked. I stared at her. "Steaks. Cocktails. An overpriced butter cake." "We sell atmosphere," she said, ignoring me. "Control. Discretion. A sense that whatever chaos exists outside these windows stops at our door. Tonight, you dragged that chaos straight through the dining room and sat it in booth 23 with a basket of fries." I felt something cold settle under my ribs. "You are talking about a child. I am talking about judgment." She folded her hands on top of my file. "And since yours seems compromised by sentimentality, I am making a scheduling adjustment effective immediately. Your Friday and Saturday night shifts are being reassigned for the next 3 weeks." For a second I honestly thought I had misheard her. Friday and Saturday were my money shifts. Everyone knew that. Those 2 nights covered Mom's medication copays and the gap between my rent and what I could make on weekday lunches. "You are cutting my weekends," I said. "I am protecting the restaurant from further lapses in judgment. Because I helped a lost kid. Because you prioritized a personal rescue fantasy over service standards." I laughed then, one short ugly sound that surprised both of us. "A rescue fantasy. Watch yourself." "No, you watch yourself." The words were out before I could pull them back. I took a breath and lowered my voice, because shouting never helps when the other person controls the schedule. "Diane, I do not know what you wanted me to do. Put him back on the sidewalk. Tell him to come back when he could afford an appetizer. Do not be dramatic." "I am not being dramatic. I am asking a serious question." She closed my file with a snap. "You are not paid to ask questions. You are paid to follow procedure. Show me the procedure for a lost child, then." That made her stand up. Diane was not tall, but she had perfected the art of using posture as a weapon. "What I am showing you," she said, each word clipped and careful, "is professional mercy. Another manager would write you up formally for insubordination, guest neglect, and unauthorized comping. I am choosing not to. For now. For now." The 2 most poisonous words in low-wage employment. They mean you still owe gratitude for the privilege of being threatened later. I looked at the file on her desk and knew there was no version of this conversation I could win. Not tonight. Not with my mother's pharmacy bill in my purse and 1 month left on the payment plan for the transmission. Repair on my Honda. So I did what women like me do when the truth will cost more than silence. I swallowed it. "Fine," I said. "If that is the decision, I understand." "Good." Diane sat back down and reached for her laptop, already done with me. "And Claire? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I strongly suggest you do not mention tonight's incident to anyone outside the restaurant. Especially not Mr. Sterling's office, if they contact you. There is no reason to complicate a simple misunderstanding. A simple misunderstanding. I nodded once because I did not trust myself to speak, then walked out before she could see the expression on my face. Tessa was waiting by the lockers pretending to look for a missing lip balm. "How bad?" she whispered the second the office door shut behind me. I held up 3 fingers. 3 weekends. Her mouth fell open. For what? Saving a child too politely. Apparently I disrupted the atmosphere. Tessa swore under her breath and pulled me into a quick side hug that smelled like vanilla body spray and espresso. "She is awful," she said. "She is strategic," I corrected, because awful sounds careless and Diane never was. I grabbed my tote, shrugged into my coat, and stepped out the employee exit into a drizzle so cold it felt personal. In the parking lot I sat in my car without starting it, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the wet glow of the restaurant sign reflected in the asphalt. Then I reached into my apron pocket and took out Adrian Sterling's card. Cream stock. Silver lettering. A downtown office address I would never have reason to visit. I turned it over once in my fingers and almost laughed at myself. Men like Adrian Sterling did not change the lives of women like me. They said thank you. Their assistant sent flowers or gift cards or maybe a fruit basket if they were feeling dramatic. Then they went back to their towers and their boardrooms and their children with GPS watches. I tucked the card into my wallet anyway, drove home to my apartment in Berwyn, and spent the rest of the night at my kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, and the sickening realization that kindness had just cost me almost a month of rent. I should tell you that losing 3 weekend shifts did not feel dramatic in the moment. It felt mathematical. That was always the cruelest part of being poor. Disaster rarely arrived with thunder. It came as subtraction. 1 cut shift. 1 late fee. 1 prescription refill you moved to next week and prayed your mother would not notice. I was still doing the numbers in my head the next morning when I pulled into the Maple and Ashford employee lot just before 10:30 for the lunch shift Diane had left me with, as if weekday salads and business lunches were some generous compromise. The sky was flat and white, the kind of cold Chicago morning that made every parked car look tired. I sat behind the wheel of my Honda for a moment, staring at the restaurant's back entrance and trying to convince myself that I could get through 6 hours without saying anything I would regret. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was my mother's assisted living facility. Those calls never do anything kind to your pulse. I answered too fast. Claire Bennett. Hi, Claire, it is Janine from Oak Terrace. The activities director. I exhaled. Your mom is fine. She just wanted to remind you that the podiatrist comes Tuesday, and if she wants the nicer compression socks, there is a small balance from last month. Of course there was. There was always a balance from last month. How much? I asked. Janine told me. It was not catastrophic. That almost made it worse. Catastrophes at least announce themselves. This was just one more modest number slipping onto a pile that had already learned my name. I will take care of it, I said. Thank you. By the time I walked through the employee entrance, I had already decided 2 things. First, I was not calling Adrian Sterling's office no matter what his card said. Rich men thanked people all the time. It did not mean they wanted a waitress with rent problems in their world. Second, I was going to survive the shift with my dignity intact even if Diane spent the whole afternoon pretending I had committed treason with a bread basket. The first thing I noticed in the break room was Tessa's face. The second was the way everyone else went oddly quiet when I walked in. Not silent. Just the kind of hush that means there is already a conversation happening and you have accidentally arrived in the middle of it. Tessa stood up so fast she knocked her water bottle over. Claire. Good morning to you too. Have you checked your phone? I have been busy being poor in the parking lot. Why? She looked at Diego, then back at me. Do not freak out. I hate when people say that because it always means there is something worth freaking out about. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. There were 6 unread texts, 2 missed calls from Tessa, and 1 message from an unknown number containing nothing but a link. Tessa took a breath like she was about to deliver a diagnosis. Some woman from last night posted a video. My stomach dropped. What kind of video? The bad kind. I opened the link. It led to a local lifestyle account on Instagram, one of those pages that pretends to cover food and city culture but mostly survives on outrage with decent lighting. The caption read, "Waitress at Maple and Ashford ignores paying guests to babysit random child during dinner rush. Unprofessional or sweet?" Under it was a 30-second clip, filmed from somewhere near table 6. There I was, kneeling beside Noah's booth, tying his shoe and talking to him while a man's voice in the background complained about waiting on another glass of wine. The video did not show the rain. It did not show that he was lost. It did not show me calling the city line or Tessa checking the hotel entrance or Noah looking like he might throw up from fear. It just showed a tired waitress crouched beside a child while the dining room moved around her. Out of context, it looked exactly like negligence. The comments were already a sewer. Fire her. If I am paying $40 for lunch, I do not want daycare with my steak. Why is there a strange kid in the restaurant at all? This is why service is dead. I scrolled once and stopped because my hands had started shaking. Who posted it? I asked. Tessa bit her lip. Woman from table 6. Pearls. Blonde bob. She tagged the restaurant and said management handled it professionally. Of course she did. Of course the woman who had looked at a scared child and seen an inconvenience would go home and turn him into content. Diane knows? I asked. Tessa's silence was answer enough. Right on cue, the break room door opened and Diane stepped in wearing a charcoal blazer and the expression of someone who had just discovered a useful tragedy. Claire, she said. Office. Now. Nobody looked at me as I followed her down the back hall, which was somehow kinder than pity. Diane did not sit this time. She stood behind the desk with her laptop open, the same video paused on the screen. I assume you have seen it, she said. Yes. Then I will keep this brief. Corporate has already reached out. The owner group is concerned about reputational exposure, guest perception, and procedural liability. Procedural liability, I repeated. That is what we are calling helping a lost child now. We are calling it footage of a server abandoning her section to engage in unauthorized personal conduct on the dining room floor. I stared at her. You know that is not what happened. What I know, Diane said, is that I now have documented evidence of you neglecting service, violating floor policy, and creating a public relations problem for this restaurant. She turned the laptop toward me. As of today, your employment at Maple and Ashford is terminated effective immediately. For a second I honestly did not understand the sentence. It sat in the air between us like a language I used to know. You are firing me. I am ending your employment. Because someone posted a misleading video. Because your judgment has become a liability. I laughed then, but it came out wrong. Thin. Hollow. The sound of a person who has just run out of places to put disbelief. A little boy got lost, I said. He asked if he could stay until his father found him. I kept him safe. That is the whole story. Diane's face did not move. It is no longer our story to control. She slid a white envelope across the desk. Final paycheck through yesterday. Information on Cobra coverage. A printed acknowledgement form for me to sign. My hands stayed at my sides. Did you tell them who the boy was? I asked. That is not relevant. It is very relevant. Not to your termination. There are moments when humiliation is so clean it almost feels cold. I remember the hum of the mini fridge under Diane's desk. The smell of stale coffee. The cheap framed quote about excellence hanging crooked over her shoulder. I remember thinking that this was how lives get derailed in America. Not always by catastrophe. Sometimes by one woman with a management title and a talent for rewriting the truth before lunch. I did not sign the acknowledgement form. I took the envelope because I needed groceries and gas and compression socks for my mother. Then I unpinned my name tag, set it on Diane's desk, and said the only thing I trusted myself to say. I hope you never need a stranger to choose kindness over policy. Her expression flickered at that. Just once. Then it was gone. I walked out carrying my coat, my tote bag, and the last paycheck Maple and Ashford would ever give me. In the parking lot, I sat in my car with the envelope in my lap and stared at Adrian Sterling's business card tucked into my wallet. I had spent all morning telling myself not to call it. By 12:15, with my job gone and my mother's bill still due, I was no longer sure pride was a luxury I could afford. I called the number on Adrian Sterling's card from the front seat of my car because I could not bear the idea of making that call from my apartment kitchen where everything already knew too much about me. The parking lot behind Maple and Ashford was half full of lunch traffic and delivery vans, and I remember staring at the brick wall behind the dumpsters while the phone rang, thinking this was either the most humiliating thing I had done in years or the smartest. Maybe both. A woman answered on the second ring with the kind of voice that belonged to people who wore silk blouses to work and never had to ask what overdraft fees were. Office of Adrian Sterling. I almost hung up. Instead I said, "My name is Claire Bennett. Mr. Sterling gave me this number last night." His son Noah was the little boy who got separated outside Maple and Ashford. There was the briefest pause, not confusion, more like recognition clicking into place. "Miss Bennett, yes. Please hold." I sat there gripping the phone hard enough to leave a mark in my palm while a piano version of something expensive and forgettable filled the line. 30 seconds later a man came on. "Ms. Bennett, this is Caleb Rhodes, Mr. Sterling's chief of staff. Mr. Sterling has been trying to reach you since this morning." I blinked. "He has?" "We called the number listed on your employee emergency contact file. Your manager informed us you were unavailable and suggested any further communication go through restaurant administration." I closed my eyes. Of course Diane had done that. Of course she had tried to stand in the doorway and rename herself the doorway. "I was available," I said carefully. "I was just fired." The silence on the other end changed temperature. "I am sorry," Caleb said after a beat. "Did you say fired?" "About 40 minutes ago." "Can you come downtown this afternoon?" It was such a clean question that for a second I thought I had misheard it. "Come where?" "Sterling Group Headquarters. Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you personally." I looked down at the white envelope from Maple and Ashford still sitting open on the passenger seat beside my final paycheck. "I do not exactly look corporate right now." Caleb's voice softened by maybe 5%. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Sterling is not requesting a presentation. He would just like the chance to hear what happened in your own words. There are moments when dignity becomes a luxury item." I had spent the morning getting fired over a video of me tying a child's shoe, and my mother still needed compression socks. "All right," I said. "Where do I go?" By 1:30 I was driving into a parking garage under a glass tower on Wacker Drive with my hair twisted into a clip and my nicest sweater on, which only meant it had no bleach stains and the elbows were still intact. Sterling Group Headquarters looked exactly the way money wants to be seen by other money. Marble floors. Quiet elevators. Receptionists who smiled like they had been professionally trained to calm people before lawsuits. A woman at the front desk handed me a visitor badge with my name already printed on it and told me Mr. Rhodes would be right out. That did something odd to my nerves. People like me are used to waiting. Waiting for a manager, for a landlord, for a doctor to return a call, for a paycheck to clear. Being expected is a strangely intimate thing when you are not used to it. Caleb Rhodes appeared a minute later, all navy suit and silver tie and the kind of posture that suggested expensive schools and a talent for never wrinkling. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes behind clean rectangular glasses. "Miss Bennet." He shook my hand warmly, not too long, not too soft. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "I did not exactly have plans," I said. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "I am sorry about that." He led me through a hallway of glass offices and muted artwork into a conference room overlooking the river. The city looked different from up there. Cleaner, somehow. As if altitude could edit out the parts of Chicago where people counted grocery items before they reached the register. Adrian Sterling was standing by the window when we walked in with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled once at the forearms. He turned as the door opened, and whatever expression had been on his face when he was alone disappeared into something more controlled. Not cold. Just careful. "Claire," he said, crossing the room toward me. "Thank you for coming." "Your office made it sound less optional than that," I said before I could stop myself. To my surprise, he laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to make him look more human and less like the kind of man whose name gets engraved on buildings. "Fair," he said. "Can I get you coffee? Tea? Water?" "No, thank you." What I wanted was to know why I was in a skyscraper because I had given a child fries. Adrian gestured for me to sit. Caleb took the chair at the far end of the table and opened a leather notebook. I remained standing for half a second longer than necessary because the whole room felt like the set of a life I did not belong in. Then I sat. Adrian did not waste time. "Caleb told me Maple and Ashford terminated you this morning." "Yes. Because of what happened with Noah." "That is the official version." His jaw tightened at that. "I would like the unofficial one." So I told him. Not dramatically. Not like I was auditioning for sympathy. I told him about Noah standing in the rain. About bringing him inside. About Diane calling him a liability before she ever called him a child. About the non-emergency line, the woman at table 6, the video clipped out of context, the 3 weekend shifts I lost before the firing even happened. Adrian did not interrupt. Neither did Caleb, though his pen moved fast across the page. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Adrian leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand over his mouth the way exhausted people do when they are trying not to say the first thing that comes to mind. "For what it is worth," he said finally, "I am very sorry." Not in the polished corporate sense. In the plain human one. I looked at the skyline behind him and nodded because I did not trust myself to answer graciously without sounding tired. "There is something else you should know," he said. Caleb slid a folder toward me. Inside were printouts with Maple and Ashford's logo at the top, screenshots of social media comments, and a page of bullet points labeled Sterling Hospitality Preliminary Review. I frowned. "What is this?" 3 months ago, Adrian said, Sterling Group entered early-stage discussions to invest in the parent company that owns Maple and Ashford and several other restaurant properties. It is not public yet, but we have been conducting due diligence on guest experience, management practices, and operational risk. Last night was not part of that process. Noah disappearing was not exactly on anyone's agenda. But the way your manager handled it put Maple and Ashford back on my radar in a way I cannot ignore. I looked from the folder to him. "You were already investigating them." "Reviewing them," Caleb corrected gently. "Now we are looking closer." Adrian folded his hands on the table. "Claire, I did not ask you here just to apologize or send you home with a thank you check. I asked you here because I think what happened to you is connected to a larger problem. Inside that restaurant, and I would like to know how deep it goes. There is a particular kind of shame that comes from sitting in a glass conference room with a billionaire while explaining how easy it was for one middle manager to erase your livelihood before lunch." I did not cry. I want credit for that. I sat there in my department store sweater with my final paycheck in my purse and listened while Adrian Sterling and his chief of staff explained that Maple and Ashford had not just mishandled one lost child. According to Caleb, there had been guest complaints buried in internal reports, staff turnover numbers that did not make sense, and payroll patterns that looked clean from a distance but ugly up close. We do not have proof of intentional misconduct yet, Caleb said, tapping the folder in front of me with one neat finger. What we have are inconsistencies. Enough of them that your situation may not be an isolated incident. May not be, I repeated. You mean she has done this before? Adrian met my eyes across the table. That is what I am trying to determine. He said it calmly, but there was anger underneath it now. Not loud anger. Rich people rarely need that. This was the colder kind, the kind that hires attorneys instead of raising its voice. Claire, he said, I need to ask you something that may sound unusual. My day is already unusual. Go ahead. That got the faintest hint of a smile from Caleb. Adrian folded his hands. Would you be willing to spend the next few days walking Caleb and our hospitality review team through everything you know about Maple and Ashford? Not just what happened with Noah. The staff. The scheduling. The management culture. Who gets punished, who gets protected, how complaints actually move through the building. We can review numbers all day, but numbers do not tell us how a place behaves when no one important is watching. I stared at him. You want me to investigate my old restaurant? No, Caleb said gently. We want you to help us understand it. There is a difference. He was right, though I did not fully trust the distinction yet. I am a waitress, I said. Or I was, as of an hour ago. I am not exactly Aaron Brockovich. No, Adrian said. You are a person who worked there, saw how things operated, and got punished for doing the right thing in public. That makes you relevant. Relevant. It was not the word I would have chosen, but it landed somewhere useful all the same. And if I say yes? I asked. Caleb slid a single-page agreement across the table. Temporary consulting contract. Daily rate. Confidentiality language. Transportation reimbursement. Nothing extravagant, but the number beside daily rate made me blink hard enough to feel it. It was more than I would have made in almost 2 weeks at Maple and Ashford, and for one disorienting second all I could think about was my mother's compression socks. Adrian noticed where my eyes had gone. I am not trying to buy your loyalty, he said. You should be paid for your time. I looked at the paper again. I have never been paid for my opinion before. Then the hospitality industry has been undercharging itself, Caleb said. That one actually made me laugh, which broke something loose in the room. Not tension exactly. Just the sense that I had wandered into a meeting meant for other people. I signed the agreement. Maybe that makes me sound reckless. It did not feel reckless. It felt like being too tired to keep pretending that pride would cover rent. Caleb set me up in a smaller conference room down the hall with coffee, a legal pad, and a woman from their internal review team named Sandra Liu, who had the expression of someone capable of reading lies in 3 languages. We are not asking you to speculate, she said as she opened her laptop. Just tell us what you saw. So I did. I told them about Diane cutting older servers from prime shifts and giving them to younger staff she thought fit the room better. I told them about hostess notes quietly marking certain reservations as VIP and others as minimal touch, which was restaurant code for people not worth performing for. I told them how Diane loved to talk about standards when she meant appearances, and how she used the schedule like a punishment board because it left no paper trail that looked personal. I told them about busboys being pressured to clock out and keep polishing glassware if labor costs ran high. About a dishwasher who slipped on a wet mat and was talked out of filing an incident report because it would complicate year-end numbers. About servers encouraged to absorb customer abuse with a smile because bad Yelp reviews mattered more than staff dignity. Once I started, it was like opening a closet and having everything fall out at once. Sandra asked precise questions and wrote almost nothing down, which somehow made me trust her more. Caleb came and went with printouts. Adrian did not sit in on all of it, but every time he stepped back into the room the energy shifted. Not because he was intimidating, though he was. Because everyone around him moved as if decisions could already be felt before they were spoken. Around 4 o'clock my phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Are you alive? Diane says you were stealing guest info and got caught." I stared at the message so long Sandra finally looked up from her screen. "Problem? Just a former coworker." I showed her the text. Sandra's brows lifted a fraction. "That is interesting." "Interesting how?" "Interesting because your former manager seems very concerned with controlling the story." She asked if Tessa would be willing to talk. I told her maybe, if someone approached her carefully and promised not to feed her to Diane afterward. Caleb made a note. 10 minutes later, Tessa called me on her break. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "Please tell me you are on a beach somewhere and not spiraling in your car," she said by way of greeting. "Neither. I am downtown." "Doing what?" I looked through the glass wall into the conference room where Sandra was already highlighting something on a payroll sheet and Caleb was speaking quietly into his phone. "That is a long story." "Is it a good story?" she asked. "I genuinely cannot tell yet." Tessa lowered her voice. I could hear the kitchen fans humming behind her. "Claire, Diane has been in a mood all day. She made Vanessa cry over a split check and told everyone if corporate contacts them, they are to refer all questions to management." I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. "Of course she did. There is more." Tessa hesitated, which was not like her. "Do you remember Luis from Weekend Bar Service? The one she cut after he asked about missing tip-outs?" "Yes. He says she did the same thing to him last spring. Wrote him up twice in 1 week, then pushed him out before payroll had to answer anything." I went still. "Can he prove it?" "I do not know. But I think he kept screenshots because his sister told him to." When I went back into the conference room, Sandra looked up and read my face in one glance. "You have something," she said. "Maybe." I sat down, picked up the legal pad Caleb had left for me, and wrote Luis across the top of a clean page. That was the moment I understood this was no longer about one lost boy or one bad manager or even one job. Maple and Ashford had been teaching people like Diane how to make cruelty look like policy, and people like me had been absorbing the cost because we thought nobody with power would ever care enough to ask the right questions. The next 48 hours felt less like a revenge story and more like an audit with a pulse. That was probably healthier. Real life rarely gives you the satisfaction of immediate justice. What it gives you, if you are lucky, is paperwork. Caleb spent Friday moving through Maple and Ashford's records with the patient, dangerous calm of a man who had learned long ago that people reveal more when you let them believe they are still in control. Sandra handled the internal review side, which mostly meant she asked questions so precise they made dishonesty sound clumsy. And me, apparently, I became the person in the room who could translate restaurant behavior into plain English for people who had never lived off tip share and adrenaline. By noon we had enough small pieces to make a pattern, which is a fancy way of saying Diane Mercer had been cheating the truth in every direction she could reach. Tessa agreed to speak after her lunch shift, but only if we met somewhere Diane would not see. Caleb arranged a private room at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the restaurant, and Sandra made it clear that Tessa could bring copies of anything she was comfortable sharing without signing her life away. She arrived still in her black work slacks and Maple and Ashford quarter zip, cheeks pink from hurrying through the cold, and set her iced coffee down like it had personally offended her. "I have 30 minutes before Diane notices I am gone and starts texting in all caps," she said. Sandra smiled politely. "We will be efficient." Tessa looked at me first, and some of the bravado dropped out of her face. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. It was such a simple question, and for a second I wanted to tell her the truth. That I had not slept much. That I had spent half the night making a spreadsheet of bills and the other half wondering whether I had accidentally stepped into one of those stories people tell after the fact, like destiny was obvious all along. Instead I said, "I am getting there." She nodded as if that was enough. Then she opened her phone and started talking. It turned out Diane's favorite management tool was not discipline. It was isolation. She never screamed where witnesses could compare notes later. She never wrote down the ugliest parts. She just adjusted schedules, changed sections, withheld the best shifts, and made people feel unstable enough to doubt their own memories. Tessa showed us screenshots from the scheduling app where Diane had removed Luis from weekend bar service after he asked why his tip-outs were short 2 pay periods in a row. She showed us a text from Vanessa, one of the hostesses, saying Diane had instructed staff to move older walk-ins away from the front windows during busy nights because they made the dining room look less energetic. There was a message from a former server named Colleen who had been written up for negative guest energy after refusing to flirt with a regular who kept commenting on her body. None of it looked explosive by itself. That was the point. Diane had mastered the art of making harm look administrative. She always says the same thing, Tessa told us, stirring her coffee so hard the ice rattled. That she is protecting the brand. But the brand somehow always needs protecting from women over 40, dishwashers with questions, and anybody who cannot afford to lose a shift. Sandra asked for names. Tessa gave them. Caleb asked if anyone besides Luis might have records of missing pay or retaliatory scheduling. Tessa hesitated, then nodded. Maybe Marcos in back bar. And definitely Colleen. She saved everything because her brother is a labor lawyer in Milwaukee and he told her never trust a restaurant that says, "We are family." By the time we left the coffee shop, Caleb had enough names to build a witness list and Sandra had enough screenshots to justify a deeper payroll pull. Adrian met us back at the office around 4 with the expression of a man who had just come from 3 meetings and disliked all of them. He loosened his tie as he walked into the conference room and went straight to the whiteboard Caleb had filled with dates, names, and incident notes. "How bad?" he asked. Caleb answered in the tone of someone reading weather before a storm. "Bad enough that I do not think Maple and Ashford is the only problem property. We have scheduling retaliation, possible wage discrepancies, guest discrimination practices, and a manager who appears to have intercepted outside communication to a terminated employee." Adrian looked at me. "Meaning Diane told my office I was unavailable." "More than that," Caleb said. "She positioned management as the only appropriate channel for contact after a public incident involving your son. That is not just aggressive. It is reckless." Adrian's face went still in a way I was starting to understand. Stillness was where he stored decisions before they became consequences. "And the parent company?" he asked. "Already nervous," Sandra said. "We requested archived security footage from Thursday night and the regional director suddenly wants to know whether this review is still routine." Adrian gave a short humorless laugh. "That answer would be no." He turned to me then, and his voice changed slightly. Less executive. More direct. "Claire, there is a donor dinner tomorrow night at Maple and Ashford. The parent company chairman, 2 board members, and regional operations leadership will all be there. It was already on my calendar because of the investment review. I am going." "That sounds ominous," I said. "It should." He rested. One hand on the back of a chair. "I do not intend to ambush anyone for sport. But I do intend to ask very specific questions in a room full of people who can no longer pretend this is a one-off staffing issue." Caleb slid a slim folder toward him. "We should be careful about what gets raised in open discussion versus held for legal follow-up." "Agreed," Adrian said. "But Mercer cannot be allowed to keep steering the narrative through tomorrow night." Then he looked at me again. "I would like you there." I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. "At a donor dinner." Not as waitstaff, he said dryly. As a witness. If the conversation turns where I expect it to, I want the people responsible for this chain to hear from someone they thought they could erase. I leaned back in my chair and stared at him. Through the glass wall behind him, the Chicago River was turning dark under the early winter sky, all steel and reflected light. 24 hours earlier I had been fired with a white envelope and a crooked quote about excellence over Diane's shoulder. Now a billionaire was asking me to walk back into the same restaurant in a different role entirely. You realize she is going to hate that, I said. I am counting on it, Adrian replied. That was the moment I knew tomorrow night would not be a meeting. It would be a reckoning conducted with linen napkins, board members, and the kind of quiet humiliation Diane Mercer had spent years dealing out to everyone who could not afford to fight back. Walking back into Maple and Ashford the next night without an apron on felt stranger than getting fired there. The dining room looked exactly the same as it had every night I had worked it. Same amber lighting. Same polished glassware. Same soft jazz trying to convince people they were more relaxed than they really were. The only difference was me. I was wearing a navy dress Caleb's assistant had quietly sent over to my apartment that afternoon after I admitted I did not own anything appropriate for a donor dinner unless they wanted me showing up in black slacks from Target. It was simple and elegant and fit me well enough to feel like borrowed courage. Caleb met me in the lobby with a visitor badge and a look that suggested at least 3 people had already lied to him that day. You doing all right? He asked. Ask me again after dessert. That earned a small smile. Adrian arrived 5 minutes later with the calm expression of a man walking into a room he intended to rearrange. He was in a dark suit this time, no overcoat, no rain, no frantic child in his arms. Only focus. Diane spotted us from across the host stand before we even reached the private dining room, and the change in her face was almost worth the week I had had. Surprise first. Then confusion. Then the fast, panicked recalculation of a person realizing the witness she had tried to erase had just walked back in through the front door with the man she had wanted to impress. Mr. Sterling, she said, recovering enough to step forward with a smile. What a pleasure. We were not expecting Ms. Bennett this evening. Adrian did not break stride. That is because this evening is not about your expectations. He said it politely, which made it land harder. Diane's smile held by force alone. Of course. If there is anything I can do to make the evening seamless, there is, Caleb said. Please ask the regional director and Mr. Hanley to join us in the private room before first course. Diane blinked. Now. Now would be ideal. I watched her understand, piece by piece, that the room had changed around her and nobody had bothered to hand her the new map. By the time we entered the private dining room, the parent company chairman, the regional operations director, and 2 board members were already seated with cocktails and donor packets in front of them. There was a moment of polite confusion when they saw me, the kind wealthy people wear when they are trying to determine whether someone is staff, family, or trouble. Adrian solved it quickly. Thank you all for making time tonight, he said, taking the seat at the head of the table. Before we discuss investment, I need to address a management issue that has become impossible to separate from the health of this property. Nobody touched their drinks after that. Diane remained standing near the sideboard, still smiling. In the thin, dangerous way people do when they believe charm can outrun evidence. Adrian began with Noah. Not theatrically. Just the facts. His 7-year-old son had been separated from him in bad weather. A Maple and Ashford server named Claire Bennett had found the child, brought him inside, kept him calm, and contacted the appropriate city line. So far, so good. Then he moved to what happened after. The retaliatory schedule cuts. The social media clip stripped of context. The termination. Caleb distributed copies of the timeline while Sandra joined us carrying a second folder thick enough to make one board member visibly sit up straighter. Over the last 48 hours, Adrian said, my team has reviewed guest footage, internal scheduling patterns, payroll discrepancies, and witness statements related to Maple and Ashford management practices. We have also confirmed that outside communication to Ms. Bennett was redirected through management after her termination, without authorization. Diane finally spoke. With respect, this is a profound misunderstanding. Claire had already been under review for service inconsistency, and the video online unfortunately reinforced concerns we were documenting long before Mr. Sterling's family incident. It was a good lie. Clean. Professional. Almost elegant. Caleb ruined it by sliding a stack of screenshots across the table. These are the shift assignments for the 6 weeks prior to Ms. Bennett's termination, he said. They show no documented service warnings, no performance coaching, and no guest complaints attached to her file. What they do show is a pattern of retaliatory scheduling after she contradicted management decisions. Sandra placed another sheet in front of the regional director. This one compares reported labor hours against security badge exits for back-of-house staff. Several employees appear to have been encouraged to remain working after clock-out. We also have statements regarding tip-out discrepancies and guest placement directives tied to age and appearance. The room went very quiet. Diane tried one more time. I think we are conflating operational discretion with misconduct. In a high-volume hospitality environment, managers have to make difficult choices quickly. About children? I asked before I could stop myself. Every face at the table turned toward me. I had not planned to speak. Adrian had not asked me to. But once the words were there, I could not let them go. Is that what we are calling it now? A difficult operational choice. Diane looked at me with open contempt for the first time all evening. Claire, with all due respect, you are emotional because you lost your position. No, I said. I am clear because I lost it. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Noah was cold, alone, and trying not to cry. I brought him inside because any decent person would have. You did not see a child. You saw a problem in expensive shoes. And that would have been ugly enough on its own. But then you cut my shifts, lied to Mr. Sterling's office, and fired me over a video because it was easier than admitting kindness had interrupted your dining room aesthetic. Nobody moved. Not the chairman. Not the board members. Not even Diane. I kept going because I had spent too many years swallowing things that were true. The worst part is that I do not think you even hated me personally. That would have required effort. You just knew I could not afford to fight back. Same as Luis. Same as Colleen. Same as every employee who learned that in this restaurant, dignity depended on whether management found you useful. Diane opened her mouth, but the chairman beat her to it. He was a silver-haired man named Robert Hanley who had spent most of dinner looking like his watch had better things to do. Now he looked furious in a disciplined, expensive way. Is any of this inaccurate, Ms. Mercer? He asked. Diane's gaze moved around the table, searching for an ally and finding only paper. It is incomplete, she said at last. Hanley turned to the regional director. Place Ms. Mercer on immediate administrative leave pending formal review. Effective tonight. She went white. You cannot be serious. I am very serious, he said. And if even half of what I have read in the last 10 minutes is substantiated, leave will be the least of your concerns. Diane looked at Adrian. Then, not me, as if I were still too small to have mattered. Adrian met her stare without blinking. Claire Bennett did not create your problem, he said. She revealed it. After that, everything moved quickly in the way big institutions do once they decide the risk has changed sides. Diane was escorted out by the regional director. The board members stopped pretending this was still dinner. Hanley asked Sandra for a full property review across the chain. And I sat there in my borrowed navy dress with my hands folded in my lap, feeling less triumphant than I had expected and more tired in the bones than I could explain. Adrian found me 10 minutes later in the hallway outside the private room, staring at the rain beginning again against the front windows. "You did well in there," he said. "I did not mean to make a speech. The best ones are rarely planned." He stood beside me for a moment, both of us watching the host stand where a young couple was being greeted like nothing in the building had just changed. Then he said, "Claire, Maple and Ashford is going to need more than a management replacement. If Sterling moves forward with this acquisition, I want a guest care and staff training role built into the transition. Someone who understands what hospitality feels like from the side that usually gets ignored." I looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you the chance to help rebuild a place that punished you for doing the right thing." I laughed softly because after everything, that was the line that undid me. Not the firing. Not the donor dinner. Not even Diane's face when Hanley suspended her. It was the idea that the week might end with something other than survival. "I am not qualified for a corporate title," I said. "Maybe not the title," Adrian replied. "But definitely the work." 2 weeks later, I used my first real paycheck from Sterling Hospitality to pay Oak Terrace in full, buy my mother the nicer compression socks without doing mental subtraction in the pharmacy aisle, and take Evan out for burgers where he admitted he was proud of me in the awkward V.